Hello everybody and welcome to the latest in the series of Celsus Emerging Insights seminars. I'm Claire Burns, I'm the Director of Celsus, and really grateful to everybody who's taken the time out. I know what's really busy schedules to be with us this morning, but I think it's also just a real reflection on people's desire and passion around this subject area to get as much information as they can. We've had a huge response to the seminar. And again, I think that very much reflects the way this cuts across. I was just thinking this is a subject matter that really cuts across both our personal and professional interests and concerns for many of us. Today's seminar is entitled Protecting Children and the Risk of Online Sexual Abuse. What do we need to know? And I'll introduce our three speakers in a moment, but just a short bit before we start about the series of seminars. They were launched in 2023 to kick off a new short series of webinars for practitioners or anyone with responsibility or interest in child protection in Scotland. And in particular, they're designed to give people a bit of space and a bit of reflective time to get information and insights, particularly into new developments and risks. And this is no less true of the topic today. And I know that lots of people have been in touch with us through CPC and through other networks to say this is something that we're really concerned about and how can we find out more about it. So just give us a bit of space to think about, give access to new thinking, research, insights and perspectives, and a space for all of those who've got responsibility for child protection to learn and engage as a community and ask questions. So just some housekeeping again before we start. We've got a large number of attendees for the webinar, and as we've done before, attendees' cameras and microphones will be automatically turned off, as will the chat function, and we'll manage all of that. We'll be using the Q&A function to collect questions and comments for after we've heard the presentations, and I'll be getting those fed through to me, and I'll kind of summarise them and then pass them on to our speakers. We would ask that no people or organisations are referenced specifically within questions and comments, and for attendees to refrain from taking any photographs or screenshots of the webinar during the live session. This is to provide anonymity for our attendees and their organisations, as well as to protecting the content of the webinar, which will contain references. So there's a particular reason for that today, and it contains references to a social media deterrence campaign developed by Police Scotland and the Lucy Faithfull Foundation, which has not been launched at the moment, but launched at the beginning of July. So that's why we're being particularly careful around the confidentiality and anonymity this morning. In most of these seminars, we have been emphasising the wellbeing element, and again, even more significant for the topic today. So given the series of this, and particularly the subject matter of this one, what is shared and discussed may be upsetting, and this can affect all of us, and it might even take us quite unexpectedly. So please take time out of the seminar if you need to during the webinar or afterwards. There have been wellbeing messages that have been sent in advance. They will also be in the chat function. If you need to speak to someone about how you're feeling, connect with someone you feel comfortable talking to. And we've also provided information for people to talk in confidence to the Samaritans or breathing space. In particular, if you're a survivor of abuse or worried that a child or young person may be at risk of harm, there are steps you can take to share this information. And again, we're sharing that in the chat function. And I will reiterate some of those messages at the end, again, as well for people. So, and again, you can be in touch with us at any point as well, if need be. So, and now to our speakers, and a huge welcome to them, and thanks in advance for, I know, the preparation that they've put into today, and for really sharing their expertise with us today and agreeing to come along. I cannot do justice to their CVs, so I'm going to just say a small part of what they've done. So Karen McKellar, Karen will be our first speaker today. Karen is Detective Superintendent with Police Scotland. Over the last year, Karen has led Police Scotland's National Child Protection Portfolio, as well as being responsible for the Force's child protection policy work. She heads up the National Child Abuse Investigation Unit and the online child sexual abuse and exploitation teams, the specialist teams responsible for investigating online child abuse. Karen chairs Police Scotland's multi-agency Prevent Online Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Group, and along with her team is involved in working with partners in the EU and UK on a project that aims to deliver action to reduce the number of abused children and protect those at risk of exploitation. Karen also sits on several UK groups focusing on law enforcement as well in relation to this subject matter. So we're, again, can see Karen's bringing a huge amount of expertise with her today. And I think, Karen, that might be just one Small aspect of your CV, but bits that are very important. We've also got Chris Hughes with us today. Welcome, Chris. Chris is a hotline director from the Internet Watch Foundation. Chris joined that in February 2012. He is responsible for the running of the hotline, which receives inbound reports from all over the world and proactively searches for child sexual abuse material. Chris is the IWF's key contact with law enforcement bodies in the UK and around the world, including Interpol. He leads on the IWS victim identification referrals to law enforcement, ensuring that incidents are escalated to the National Crime Agency appropriately. Chris also sits on several advisory groups, which include multi-agency preventing online sexual abuse and exploitation group with Police Scotland, the National Crime Agency CSA Prevent Group, and In Hope working groups. So again, as you can see, we're really bringing people with direct experience here as well. And last but not least, we'll hear from Stuart Allardyce, and Stuart is director of the Lucy Faithfull Foundation Scotland. And as director, he has responsibilities for Stop It Now services in Scotland, as well as research across the whole organisation. He is currently chair of the National Organisation for the Treatment of Abuse in the UK and Ireland, and was formerly changed NOTA, as that's called, in Scotland. He is a visiting researcher here at the University of Strathclyde and an associate at CYCJ and a trustee at White Ribbon Scotland. He is a member of the Scottish Government's expert working group on preventing sexual offending amongst children and young people. So welcome to the three of you, and again, huge thanks in advance. So with no further ado, Karen, I'm going to pass over to you to share your presentation with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to kind of share the insights and information, a little bit of information regarding online child sexual abuse. As Claire said, I'm the Child Protection Lead for Police Scotland. Also have responsibility for the teams involved in investigating online child sexual abuse. So my aim today is to provide a bit of context, some insights from a Scottish perspective, and also highlight some of the work that my own organisation, Police Scotland, does in general in this area. And I'll end my presentation with some points and thoughts I'd like you to take away and consider in the context of your own workplace and practice. And in addition to that, as Claire highlighted, Police Scotland have been working with Lucy Faithfull Foundation and the Stop It Now service. And we have a new Get Help or Get Caught campaign that will be launched on the 1st of July. And we'd like to let you see that after Stuart's presentation at the end. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Michelle. So it's important to put a bit of context, as I said, around about online child sexual offending and set the scene to an extent. The threat in relation to online child sexual abuse is increasing. It's a global issue. It doesn't recognise borders and it doesn't recognise area boundaries. Countries across the world are grappling with the increase of online offending. Although difficult to accurately state figures, more and more research and statistics are produced each year, giving us an indication of the scale and prevalence of this type of offending nowadays. And the simple fact is that we all live our lives online, children and young people more so. So how many of you are sitting there just now with your phones nearby, notifications coming through from any social media apps you use? How many of you truly understand how the algorithms work? Or are your privacy settings current and are they in place? I'm no expert, but I'm aware that algorithms are designed to push content and keep you engaged. So what does that mean for young people exploring online or using apps to communicate with their hundreds of friends? It's clear to us nowadays that the world of online child sexual abuse is no longer contained on the dark web. It's on the open web, and accessibility as a result to child sexual abuse material has increased. Across the UK, we're seeing an increase in the severity of images and at the same time a decrease in the age of children depicted in those images. And by that, I mean children under 10. As we've all experienced, the pandemic has pushed us further and further into living our lives online, which brought many opportunities, many positive opportunities, but it's also seen an increase in the risks associated with this. You'll have heard of end-to-end encryption by social media platforms, and this will see increased dangers for children on any of the associated well-known apps as it becomes more difficult to detect child sexual abuse material. Research is showing us that online pornography has exacerbated things. It can have links with online offending against children. Violence and pornography can often go hand in hand, and bearing in mind how algorithms work, constantly pushing content and gradually more severe content. How does this play out for a teenage boy, for example, accessing porn sites and exploring his sexuality? Or an adult? When we think about the potential of desensitization or normalization of behavior, as I've heard it being called, or the justifications that we sometimes hear around what is online isn't actually seen as real, what is the longer term impact from this? The accessibility of pornography is not just restricted to porn sites. It may be a surprise to you, but recently it was reported that X or Twitter is the most common place to see porn. Something that we're seeing currently in our own investigations. With the recent enactment of the Online Safety Act, we've yet to see the full impact of legislation which provides increased responsibility on platforms and the tech giants to improve age verification measures, for example. And I would recommend accessing Ofcom's site to see the work that they're doing in this area. They've got a number of consultations ongoing, but in effect, they have to police the tech giants. So we've previously referred to contact and non-contact offending, extended reality and AI. The latter is almost perceived as a lesser crime, not my thoughts, I hasten to add. But the reality is that nowadays the lines between all of these are blurred. I recently heard in-person and online offending being described as two sides of the same coin, and I would absolutely agree. One enables the other, and what we see is that just because perpetrators are involved in one, it doesn't mean that they're not involved in the other. So with AI, images are becoming so realistic that it's getting increasingly difficult to tell the difference. But it's really important to note that they are treated in the same way as other images. No matter which type of image offends, there is always a victim, a child or a young person somewhere in the chain of events leading to the image posted online, whether it's pseudo or AI generated. An indecent image of a child is illegal, whether deemed to be real or not, and we collectively need to be clear about that. Then there's the online blackmail or sextortion. Slightly different because it's financially motivated as opposed to sexually motivated, but I'm sure you'll agree the links with this area are absolutely clear. This represented about 12% of all cybercrime reported in Police Scotland in 2023, illustrating the sheer prevalence of this crime. The figures are likely to be much higher when taking into consideration the sextortion attempts that go unreported. The impact of victims of sextortion can vary. There's much more than just a financial loss at stake. It affects adults, it affects children alike. But as far as children are concerned, teenage males in particular are vulnerable to sextortion. And I'm sure you'll be aware of the recent publicity and focus on this following the tragic suicide of 16-year-old Murray Dowie at the end of last year that's been highly publicised. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So a very short slide, I'm hoping quite an impactful one. It was taken from the Global Threat Assessment in 2023 by the We Protect Global Alliance, and I think it highlights exactly what we're dealing with when it comes to online child sexual abuse. Well-known social media platforms, encrypted messaging apps, and online gaming are all used to make contact with children. TikTok, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, all well known, all well used by the general population. And in Scotland, from our figures over the last year, Snapchat, Instagram and WhatsApp have been the most common platforms used that I'm seeing in our investigations. So 3 clicks to find child sexual abuse material and 19 seconds to start a grooming process. So let's move on to the Scottish context. What does this all mean for Scotland? There are so many sets of statistics out there, as I've said, and the reports highlighted as pre-reads go into some of these, so I'm not going to regurgitate them. But the stats here, the ones that I've highlighted, relate to official recorded crime in Scotland. And I'm under no illusion that this shows the full extent of the issue. But the stats show us it's on the increase, as we know, and it has been over the last 5 years or so. And we currently estimate about 20% increase in the last year in online child sexual cybercrimes committed against children. Most sexual cybercrimes involve a child victim, excuse me, and for crimes reported in Scotland, most perpetrators are from Scotland. Now, given the audience, given those of you that are beaming into this just now, I think it's really important to note how difficult it can be for victims to disclose offences in this area. And having worked in public protection for most of my career, I recognise the different reasons for this. But when it comes to online offending, it's particularly difficult. And this is due to the feelings of guilt and shame on behalf or on the part of the victim. Feelings like, why didn't I just turn off the phone? It's my fault. Very, very common. It's important we are extremely mindful of this when we're dealing with anyone who discloses online abuse. And the other aspect of this is that some don't even recognise that they've been groomed or abused online. It was just part of a game. And for some, they believe that they are the ones that are in control. They're the ones that are getting paid after all, whether that's money, gifts, gaming vouchers, whatever. So in addition to the information that we receive in Police Scotland from partners, a lot of what we deal with comes from referrals through the industry themselves, where child sexual abuse material or conversations about it have been detected. And ultimately, this comes to us through the National Crime Agency. This will ultimately be impacted by end-to-end encryption, as I mentioned earlier. So it's important that we look beyond the investigation of crimes to the importance of education and awareness raising and prevention. We move on to the next slide. The information highlighted here is from a review of a number of different databases in Police Scotland. It's not what I would refer to as official recorded crime statistics, but it's a snapshot, if you like. So apologies if you feel that I'm being a bit vague. But I wanted to have a look at offending in more detail, and what our work so far has shown us is that it absolutely mirrors what's going on elsewhere in the UK and indeed elsewhere in the world. So the majority of victims are aged 12 to 15 and female. It's important to note, however, that boys are less likely to disclose due to the stigma that's associated with this, and we shouldn't forget them. Over 90% of perpetrators are male, with around a quarter of them 17 and under. And that leads us on to peer-to-peer offending, often the disclosure of intimate images by peers. And I'm sure we're all aware of children sharing images with each other before they know it, out of control, and feature in further distribution to classmates. Again, the impact of this can be devastating on the victims and those who feature in the images. Unlike other parts of the UK, in Scotland, the sharing of an image of a child of themselves tends to be dealt with under child protection processes or an agreed single agency support, whether that's through education or other relevant partner, to prevent, in effect, victims being charged, but also to ensure that children are supported in what can be an extremely distressing situation for them. So how do police investigate online child sexual abuse? Well, as I've said, I lead the National Child Abuse Investigation Unit, and I've got specialist teams within that unit located across the country. They support local policing teams, but also work internationally, given some perpetrators or victims of Scottish perpetrators can be located elsewhere in the world. And we're currently running, for example, a number of inquiries in tandem with the FBI. So we also have victim identification team. Their role is reviewing images that we recover to identify children so that we can ensure safeguarding measures are implemented and actions taken. And for me, they're very much the unsung heroes, given the volume and the content that they have to view on a daily basis. And as you might imagine, we have to be really mindful of their welfare. But they have an incredibly difficult task, which they're all totally committed to. And in some devices, we can recover up to, and if not more than, hundreds of thousands of images. So the investigation teams deal with what we call NOCAPs, and they're National Online Child Abuse Packages, which some of you may have heard of before. These NOCAPs are developed through the police to the stage where action can be taken, and teams will go and progress warrants. They'll arrange IRDs through local policing teams, and they'll take action against perpetrators, working in partnership with Stuart's organisation to encourage any perpetrators to make contact with and seek support from them as we seek to prevent further offending and therefore further victims. Now, I have a quick case study which I wanted to highlight in order to show how the police deal with information in relation to child sexual abuse material. As Claire said, the topic is quite emotive, so I'll just kind of highlight that as a bit of a health warning for people. I'm not going to go into the graphic details of anything, it is quite general. But I wanted to use this to dispel any myths or stereotypes around the type of inquiries that we deal with daily, and also highlight the devastating impact they can have on the other victims of online child sexual abuse and exploitation, and that's the families of the perpetrator. So information was received by police that an individual was engaged with someone via Twitter discussing child sexual abuse material. Images were of a schoolgirl. They'd been shared, showing her undressing and focusing on her groin area. The discussion was highly sexualised. It was inferred that the child was a daughter of the individual concerned. And incidentally, he also shared an image of himself. This information was passed via an OCAP to our investigation teams. The child wasn't identified at this point, and there were difficulties identifying the perpetrator. But the school uniform ultimately led to inquiries at the school and the family concerned being identified. Checks were carried out with partners and revealed that the family were unknown to police or them. The perpetrator was married and employed. Given concerns regarding the girl's safety, action had to be taken swiftly, and the perpetrator was traced at home, and unfortunately he was there with his children and his wife at the time. His devices were examined at the house and revealed indecent communications as well as indecent images. He was arrested and removed from the house, and officers remained with his wife and children, who were extremely distressed and shocked, as you might imagine. His wife was signposted to support and was also advised that we would have to instigate child protection processes and multi-agency discussion would be taking place. An IRD took place in respect of the children, as it was important, obviously, to establish whether there was any further offending had taken place against them. Social work colleagues proceeded to provide the family with support, and the perpetrator's wife in particular. The family had never experienced any social work input previously. The perpetrator did not speak during the interview, but was charged with sexual offences and telecommunications offences relating to what had been uncovered on his devices at his home address. He was released on bail to another address, and conditions put in place prohibiting him contact with his wife and children while investigations were progressed. A full examination of the devices taken from the perpetrator were undertaken, with a large volume of other images and other offences identified, including communication with individuals over social media from elsewhere in the world. Relevant information was then passed to law enforcement agencies in relevant countries for consideration and action as appropriate. And due to comments from his daughter, she had to undergo an interview, although she did not disclose or make any disclosures. But given the nature of the images and the content, the perpetrator's wife, unfortunately, had to be shown some. This had to be managed extremely carefully, and was still very, very distressing for her. So I'm not going to go into the specifics of the case any further, but I think you'll agree the impact of this action is clear. The perpetrator has lost his family and essentially his life as he knew it. His family are devastated, shocked, upset, and horrified by what's taken place. And after being married to him for a long time, his wife had absolutely no inclination of her husband's behaviour. The result of his actions being that she has taken on the mortgage and supports the children both emotionally and financially, and he no longer has access to them. The role of the police in the investigation of online child sexual abuse is clear, but the impact of the action we have to take can be utterly devastating for families. I would like to say this scenario is unusual, but it isn't. And we're currently supporting work to look at how families can be better supported through us and with our partners. But the other reason I wanted to highlight this is because the perpetrator had a well-paid job, was in a stable relationship with children, was well known in his local community, and was unknown to either the police or other partners. And we see this more and more. And the themes touched on here are what we've targeted in our latest campaign through the help from Stuart and the Lucy Faithfull Foundation, which is, as I said, is going to be launched next month, and we'll give you a sneak peek at. If we can move on to the next slide. Please, thank you. But it's not just about the investigation of crime for police. Police Scotland also has a cyber harm prevention team which supports officers and works with partners focusing on raising awareness in schools, with parents, carers and practitioners, and it has a number of resources available on Glow for those officers that are involved in working in an education setting. Cyber harm prevention team also have a keen focus on the peer-to-peer aspect of online sexual abuse and the sharing of images and supporting education and young people, and supporting the education of children and young people about the consequences of pressing that share button. And finally, if we can move on to the last one. So here's some points that I've referenced earlier, which I just wanted to highlight to encourage you to have a think about, whether as a practitioner, a manager, or even as a parent or a carer. We all have a right to be safe online, especially children. Living our lives online means the removal of access to it could have an extremely detrimental impact on a child or young person. It contains their life, their connections, it's all on their phone. But equally, the continual use of it can have the same effect. So it's a kind of catch-22 situation. I don't know about you, but I have difficulty keeping up with technology, and I guess it's my age. But the fact is that there's a generational gap and that's increasing. So we collectively need to be supporting parents, carers and practitioners. So what are you doing within your organisation, or what are you aware of that's happening locally around us? We need to be mindful about how we react to sharing of images amongst children. I know I'm preaching to the converted regarding listening and being supportive and being trauma-informed, but the language we use needs to be carefully thought about given the shame and guilt that victims describe feeling. We have to be careful not to be using victim-blaming or judgmental language. Self-harm, suicide attempts, social challenges, PTSD, lifestyle instability, anxiety and depression are known to be some of the long-lasting symptoms and impacts from being a victim of sexual abuse. And finally, I wanted to highlight that Police Scotland has a partner intelligence portal, which can be used by other organisations to share intelligence with the police. I should stress it shouldn't be used instead of the child protection procedures, but it can be particularly useful if you have a bit of information you feel the police should know. It can be that final piece in a jigsaw, particularly when looking at this type of offending. And I can, or we can arrange training with partners if required, and I'm happy to be contacted through CELSIS by any organisation it's felt would benefit from this and hasn't already taken part in the training. And below at the bottom of that slide is the contact details for our cyber harm prevention team. So this is just a short overview, and I hope I've managed to give you some further insight to online offending and how we deal with it and what we need to be thinking about going forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen. And I think, I was about to say those are so sobering, but I think sobering just doesn't, it's to minimise it. They're absolutely shocking statistics, even when you work in this field. And I think what you've done a great job of is just reminding us of the scale. But I think particularly really challenging us to think about some of the stereotypes that might exist about who these perpetrators are. So I think that's certainly a couple of things that have really impacted on me this morning. So thank you. I'm going to pass now on to Chris. Chris, if you want to, great to hear your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you to Claire, and additionally following on from Karen, who's highlighted some of the areas that I will actually be touching on within my presentation. So as already kind of identified, my name's Chris Hughes. I'm the Hotline Director at the Internet Watch Foundation, and I have the everyday responsibility for managing the Hotline team here based in Cambridge. So firstly, just for those of you that aren't familiar with the IWF, I'll just give you a brief background. So we were established 28 years ago. We are the only UK hotline. We're a not-for-profit. And our primary focus, certainly in terms of the hotline and the team of analysts that I manage, is that we are tasked to find, assess and remove images of child sexual abuse from the internet. Karen mentioned briefly that there is a bit of a misnomer that the vast majority of content is on the dark web. All of the statistics that I'm going to are 99% from the clear web. So I just want to kind of make that clear, that this is where we are focusing our time and our energy. So in terms of the Internet Watch Foundation, this is clearly a global problem, and some of the stakeholders that you can see on the slide there on the left-hand side are just a small number of the partners that we have to cooperate and coordinate with in terms of being able to have a sustainable effort in this particular fight against child sexual abuse material. And it's often said that it takes a network to defeat a network, and I think that's particularly true in the case of online child sexual abuse material. So you can see that we have connections to GCHQ, the NCA, obviously Police Scotland, as well as other NGOs, including the NSPCC and Lucy Faithfull. We also operate, in addition to the IWF website, we also operate 54 other international reporting portals, which allows nationals of other countries to be able to report suspected child sexual abuse material to us online. We're also engaged with the internet industry. They need to be part of the solution. So we also provide data and services to the internet industry to help them mitigate, find and remove content from their platforms. So in terms of how do we find content, how do we encounter content? So like I said, we were set up originally to be a body for members of the public to find and have a safe place in order to report suspected child sexual abuse material that they may stumble on online. So last year, to put that into context, I think we took approximately 133,000 reports of suspected child sexual abuse. And I say suspected at this stage, and I'll clarify that in a moment. We also take reports directly from police and also the internet industry. But by far the largest proportion of our work is in 2014, we were given the ability to proactively search for content. Some of you will remember the summit that was held by David Cameron in Downing Street, and this was directly off the back of the horrendous murders of Tia Sharp and April Jones, when internet industry was called into number 10 to have a summit to see what more could be done. Both of those offenders had confessed to viewing images of child sexual abuse online before going on to commit those offences. So one of the recommendations that was put forward and that the IWF put forward was to allow us to proactively search and go out there and find content rather than simply being responsive to content that was being reported online. So that makes up about 98% of all criminal content we find is via proactive searching. So it's a significant part of our work. We also have operate 2 child-specific victim reporting services, and I'll come on to mention those in more detail in just a bit. And obviously, we're in a technological age. We also use technology such as crawlers to be able to go out and search the internet for these types of criminal images. That's just a small section of the ways in which we go about identifying and finding child sexual abuse online. The statistic that you can see on screen at the moment is taken from last year's annual report. The numbers kind of speak for themselves, but for those of you that perhaps, like me, mental arithmetic's not that great, these are the numbers that are perhaps a little bit easier to kind of digest in terms of getting a sense of the scale of the problem. And bear in mind, these are only the numbers from the IWF. There are some 54 other hotlines globally, and they will have their own numbers, and that's in addition to reports that will be made directly by industry to law enforcement. So last year we assessed, again, it was if I can use the term, a record year. We assessed just shy of 400,000 reports. And of all of those reports assessed, 275,000 of those were confirmed instances of child sexual abuse. And again, in this instance, I'm talking about reports, but we have to bear in mind that behind each of those reports, we are talking about a victim of child sexual abuse. And each report may have led us to thousands or hundreds of images contained within each report. So the scale is increasing, and it's quite shocking. What I want to do now is just to show you a brief video, a campaign video that the Internet Watch Foundation released. And this video was made because it reflects what we are seeing every day in the videos and the content that we see online. Obviously, this is content safe, but I just want to play the video and then I'll explain a little bit more about it. But this could be any house in any street in any part of the country.
Dinner in 5 minutes, Evie.
Don't be shy. You look so pretty in your picture, Evie. Just want to see what you've got under there. Just for me.
Dinner's ready.
Okay, Mum. Girls are increasingly being groomed by adults to create sexually explicit images and videos. Make sure your home doesn't have an open door to child sexual abusers. Talk to your child. Agree boundaries and set device controls together. Visit talk.iwf.org.uk for guidance.
So that was a short campaign video. I'm hoping the audio came through okay for everybody on that particular video.
So I didn't hear the audio, Chris. I don't know if anyone else did. I'd have to say it was just as, I found it incredibly powerful even without the audio. So if we can get that, we'll maybe do it at the end. So we'll try and sort that out, okay?
Okay, that's fantastic. So in the clip, the mother is heard calling up to the daughter in her bedroom to say that dinner's ready. And this reflects a video that I've seen myself. And again, these instances that we've seen many, many times where children in the supposed safety of their own homes, where we expect our children to be safe, are being approached, they're being groomed by offenders online. And the chart that I'm showing at the moment really shows how this particular online offence has grown over time. So the light coloured bars show the instances or the reports that we process where the offender is present, is physically in the presence of the child when the images are being taken. So you can see in 2017, that's pretty much all of the reports that we're processing. And then as the years progress, we see this situation where, whether we call it technology assisted or self-generated content, these are images where on analysis by our analysts, we can see that the image has been taken remotely, typically by an offender on their webcam, and in some instances where the child has shared the image, perhaps directly by taking a video or an image on their mobile phone. And if we look at the statistics at the end of last year, 92% of all of the imagery of all of the reports that we processed contained at least one instance of this technology-assisted content. And rather worryingly, when we look at the estimated ages of the victims that we see in those images, over nearly 2,500 of those images contained children estimated to be in the age of 3 to 6 years of age, which is quite a staggering statistic. So looking at the broader statistics for the content that we see online, you can see from this particular graph that typically the cohort that we see that is most affected are those in the 11 to 13 age group, and they are predominantly females, they are girls. But worryingly last year, the fastest growing age demographic was those in the 7 to 10-year-old age category. And you can see that increase was up by 25% in last year's data. And this is a growing trend. So just to kind of drill down a little bit further into the content that we see with reference to 3 to 6-year-old children, you can see the statistics on the screen there. I think the last statistic on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, 15% of the imagery and videos that we saw showed some level of penetration, either with the child penetrating themselves or being penetrated by another child. So again, in terms of thinking about the messaging and at what point we need to be able to protect our children, we need to be thinking about those younger age groups that are clearly vulnerable to this type of online enticement and grooming. So much so, and again, many of you in your professional capacity will be aware of the alerts that the National Crime Agency put out earlier in April, specifically about sextortion and the rise in this as a particular trend or a particular threat, not only to adults, but specifically for children. And this is something that we are also seeing within our hotline at the Internet Watch Foundation. I would say that what we are seeing, given we know the levels of underreporting and the challenges that a child has, or the fears that children have in terms of reporting, we know that this is the tip of the iceberg, and we can compare this to numbers that we see from the National Centre in America as an example, where this is a growing reality. So historically, when we talked about sextortion, certainly in our world, we were really looking at offenders that would contact children, and their motivation would be sexual. They might start off at a fairly low level, but they would then coerce and groom the child into producing ever more explicit content. We've seen examples of where children have then been threatened to bring in either their siblings or school friends in order for that threat to be carried on and to give offenders more access to more children. So it's a totally brutal regime. Again, typically, the vast majority of the victims that we see in that threat area are girls. Moving on to the financially motivated sextortion, this is a crime. This is obviously a financially motivated crime where, generally speaking, and I am generalising here, the motivation is really for financial gain. The content is really just a byproduct, if I can put it in those terms, in order for the offender to be able to access and extort money from children. And this is where we see typically teenage boys, young boys being the focus of those particular online gangs, which typically operate out of places like the Ivory Coast, the Philippines, etc. So the chart that I'm showing you here shows we categorize and tag all of the imagery, and we record all of the imagery that we see along with our reports. So you can see that our general work, 97% of the content that we see is typically of girls, and boys appear surprisingly at low level in terms of online imagery. However, when we look at the victim demographic for online sextortion, particularly financially motivated sextortion I'm talking about here, we see that those numbers are reversed. 79% of all of the reports that we receive are from boys. They are from boys. So again, a particularly troubling area in terms of making sure that we update the way in which we think. We used to think predominantly that girls were the demographic that were at risk online, and we need to change our thinking to reflect this particular heinous crime. So in addition to the indignity of those images being shared, clearly children and young people are being faced with that added level of threat and blackmail. And as Karen has already pointed out, sadly, we are aware on an increasing level of the number of young people that are taking their own lives, that are committing suicide. And the timescales in which this is happening is quite frightening. And as you can see from that just one particular slide, it can be a matter of hours from a child being reasonably safe online, making an incorrect decision, and then finding themselves at the mercy of these blackmailers. So it's an area that we are seeing, sadly, increase on a daily basis. You can't attend a webinar or turn on the television these days without hearing about AI, and Karen did already mention AI. I just wanted to kind of try and kill two birds with one stone in terms of talking about AI, but also child sexual abuse and the threats that we're seeing, not only now, but what's potentially coming down the line. So obviously, all of the images in that grid of 6 images on the right-hand side are AI images, almost impossible to tell from a real image. I'm showing you examples of safe images However, we are seeing content reported to us, content that we're finding proactively, where AI images of child sexual abuse are being generated. And we have to bear in mind that what can happen in an AI world, unfortunately, has no limits. There are physical limitations to the type of abuse that you could physically carry out to a child. Those boundaries and those restrictions don't exist in the AI world. So we are seeing horrendous sadomasochistic type content, including bestiality and the like, where these images are being generated. So again, I concur with Karen that this is not a victimless crime. What I wanted to show you, focusing on the images on the left-hand side, you'll see that there's a gentleman wearing a wig, and the image that is mimicking his actions is an AI projection, which can be done in real time. And the reason that I wanted to highlight this is children are already being duped by fake profiles online. And what we need to be cognizant of coming down the line is the fact that offenders could be using this technology to pose to be a young girl, a young boy, and to trick individuals online to feel that they are communicating with someone other than who they really are. And again, once the child has then entered into sharing those images, there is then an opportunity, obviously, for the offenders to either continue with the offending or extort money if that's their particular motivation. So AI is real, it's with us now, this isn't a future problem, and it's something that we should all be attuned to. Now, so far offenders are, to a degree, having it their own way. So what are we doing at the Internet Watch Foundation to be able to mitigate this particular problem? So I just wanted to show you another short video, and I'm not sure if you're going to get the audio on this, so we'll have to, so bear with me. But this is a campaign video that we released, which went out to parents, carers, to young people themselves, to give them some sense of being able to get control. And I'll talk a bit more about the video once it's finished.
So it happened. No shame, no blame, but that pic you sent, you know, the one, it's out. Maybe they said you had to do. Maybe at the time it seemed like a good idea. Maybe you were in love. Whatever, you did not say they could share it around, and now you don't know who's seen it. You might feel scared, alone, like you want to disappear, but we're not leaving it like that. It's your body. You should be in control of who sees it. So if you want it taken down, take it down. You can. Go to the Childline website, verify your age, ask them to get rid. Report remove. Because no one has the right to share a nude of you.
So that's finished now. So basically, it's obviously a young girl on a bus, and she's talking about the fact that an image has been shared, and that is, as you can see from the actors in the clip, her friends at school, her peers are having access to that image. And it really speaks to the child having the ability to be able to not settle with the status quo, to be able to actually report those images to the Internet Watch Foundation via Childline, via the NSPCC, to have that those particular images and that content removed. In terms of the service itself, this is a partnership that we entered into with Childline and the NSPCC a couple of years ago, and it was in response to the fact that children are sharing their images. They're either sharing them and that those images are being distributed online, or they're being shared from mobile phone to mobile phone. So we developed a system, understanding that Childline are the experts in terms of safeguarding and looking after children and being able to provide appropriate advice and guidance, and the Internet Watch Foundation are the experts in making an assessment of content and getting that content taken down, and the hashes or the digital fingerprints of those images being shared with industry, so that industry can either prevent the upload of that content, or scan their networks or their services to detect that content and have it removed. So this is a very child-centric approach, and it's the first of its kind. We're fortunate in the UK that, having been able to speak to the CPS, the Home Office, and various others, and the National Police Chiefs Council, that we were able to produce a service that enabled children to actually send us images that they would have, that they've taken themselves on their mobile phones and that they've shared with another person. They may not know whether their images are online, but if they are still in possession of those images can be uploaded to the IWF via a separate portal link, and then those images can be assessed. And like I said, we can then start to take action to have the content removed. So it's a vital service, and it's a service that is growing in demand in terms of the number of victims that are reporting through the IWF service. And then really, I guess, just on the last slide, in addition to the work that the hotline does, we have a comms or a campaign team that have produced a number of different resources, both for parents, children, practitioners, teachers, and the like. And I've provided some links there on the screen for people to be able to access those. And I know obviously they'll be shared afterwards. And we've just launched a new campaign this week, which is called Think Before You Share. And again, we've set up a separate website there, which has a number of campaign videos that specifically targets or is focused on young children. But there are also resources there, like I said, for educators, for parents and children, just to kind of make people aware of the consequences of sharing content online, but additionally, what resources there are out there to help mitigate some of the damages in terms of that content being shared. There are further, there's a separate website, very last link at the bottom there, which contains all of the statistics from the IWF annual report from last year, that has quite an in-depth look across all of the different studies, including where the content's hosted, the demographic of the victims, and so on and so forth. But that kind of brings me to the end of that presentation.
As I said to you, I was actually really struck by how powerful that first video was, without the audio, about thinking about that child in the bedroom with all of these other people being in. And it just made me think, in terms of this audience, you know, we're thinking about parents and carers, but we're thinking about residential workers, foster carers, you know, kinship carers. So we're thinking about what are the implications of that for them, and we can maybe come back to how they're well supported. And again, just that piece, I think, so powerful around the increase in 7 to 10-year-olds and the particular issues, you know, the gender issues that we need to think about in terms of disclosures as well. So maybe there's things that we can come back to, but again, those are just the things that really struck me. So thanks again, and we'll hear from you in the question and answer session. Can I now come to Stuart? Stuart, if you're ready, we'll just give you a couple of minutes to get set up.
Great. Thanks, Claire. My name's Stuart Allardyce. I'm the director of Lucy Faithfull Foundation Scotland. Absolutely delighted to be with you today, talking about, I think, what is, you know, a difficult and challenging topic. Let's be absolutely frank about that. Claire's given you my biography, but I'm a social worker by trade. I've worked in the child sexual abuse field in Scotland really for about the last kind of 25 years or so. There's a few things that I want to kind of talk about today. So this is going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I want to talk a little bit about what we do, the Lucy Faithfull Foundation, and then building on previous two speakers. You know, we've heard a lot about what harm looks like online. We've learned a lot about the kind of statistics and prevalence, but who are these people who commit these particular offences, and why do they offend, and what are the pathways into offending behaviour? I also want to recognise that particularly, you know, situations where people have been arrested for online offences where they may have dependent children themselves, there will often be child protection involvement. So I want to talk a little bit about management of cases and decision making in that space, particularly that space before people are convicted. I want to talk a little bit about prevention, There are some resources I'm going to share with you that hopefully you can use in your own role. They will be hyperlinked into the presentation itself, but also they'll be emailed out separately to you as well. And then we'll finish off with the premiere of a little deterrence video that we've been working with Police Scotland on. In terms of Lucy Faithfull Foundation Scotland, we are a charity based in Edinburgh, covering the whole of Scotland, and our focus is on the prevention of child sexual abuse. That's what all of our work is about. We have about 10 staff who work from here. Half of our colleagues are law enforcement colleagues or former law enforcement colleagues. Some are social workers like myself. We have a full-time forensic psychologist here as well. We provide direct support to those individuals who, for whatever reason, cannot access statutory services. So people who may not have offended yet, but who are worried about thoughts, feelings that they have towards children, individuals who have offended but haven't been convicted yet, particularly online offenders. And we also work with kind of families and partners and friends around those individuals. We do a little bit of work with adolescents who are involved with particularly online harmful sexual behaviour. And then this is key, I think. We take all the learning from this work and we turn it into resources, advice, training, for professionals, but also for parents and the general public as well. So we all have a better idea of everything that we can do to stop child sexual abuse in the first place. And last year we worked with about 150 guys and about 100 family members, and my team also worked with around 15 under 18-year-olds. So to give you a kind of sense of the kind of scale and kind of throughput here. There's a number of different referral kind of pathways into our services. One of those pathways is if you're arrested for an online offence in Scotland or under investigation, when the police arrive with a search warrant, they will give you one of these leaflets as part of their processes. Now, these are leaflets that then tell you about the services that we provide in Lucy Faithfull Foundation Scotland. We also, you can see on the right, have a leaflet that's specifically for partners and family members as well. So that's one referral route in, which is usually self-referral from individuals who are under investigation for online offences. The other kind of main referral route into ourselves comes from our UK helpline. The UK helpline is funded by the Home Office and Ministry of Justice. It's been running now for 25 years, and the helpline is there for anyone with any concerns around child sexual abuse. Completely anonymous and confidential space for anyone who's concerned about their own thoughts, feelings, or behaviours. But also if you're concerned about another adult, if you're concerned about a child, including your own child. We also have kind of professionals who phone us and also survivors of child sexual abuse as well. We're the biggest child sexual abuse prevention helpline in the world now. So figures have been creeping up for quite some time. And indeed, if you pull together phone calls to the helpline, emails that we have that come in, we have a anonymizer email system and also live chat as well. We had 19,000 contacts last year from just over 8,000 individuals. Quite a few of those individuals who contact us on the back of police-driven deterrence campaign work that we do, targeting those who are either involved with online offending or those who are on a trajectory towards online offending. So I'll say more about that in a minute. If you break down the people who call the UK-based helpline, about half of the calls come in from individuals worried about their own sexual thoughts, feelings, or behaviours. Many of them have already been arrested for an offence, including an online offence, but probably about 20% are individuals who are unarrested. And when you phone the helpline, you're told that if you give us any identifying details about who you are and tell us that you're a risk to yourself or other people, or indeed that you've been involved with any criminality, we may have to pass that information on. However, you can choose whatever identity to use in this call, and we have no way of tracing it back to you. So people do use that anonymity within the call itself. And then about a third of the calls are people who are worried about somebody else. You know, it might be a partner worried about their husband's online behavior. It might be a mum who's phoning up who's worried about the way her uncle is playing with her 3-year-old daughter. No abuse has happened yet, but there's something that's making her feel really uncomfortable, and she's looking for advice and support in some way. So general kind of practical advice and support around child sexual abuse prevention from our helpline. We don't use volunteers. All of our helpline colleagues are staff. And indeed, a number of the majority of the calls we receive from people who are worried about their own sexual thoughts, feelings, or behaviours towards children are involved with online behaviours in some way. So let's move on to what we know about online offending. This particular publication is worth knowing about. It's a little bit out of date now, but it is written for a Scottish audience. A literature review prepared by the Risk Management Authority in Scotland, a review of risk posed by internet offenders. So this was a very extensive literature review that was done by the RMA. It told us a number of things. That the majority of those involved with this kind of offending behaviour, both looking at child sexual abuse material and having sexualised conversations with children online, tend to be Caucasian males, mean age of mid-30s through to kind of early 40s in most studies. But interesting that there is also a spike between age 14 and 21 for people involved with these kind of behaviours as well. Typically, we're talking about individuals who are better educated and more likely to be in employment and have no history of involvement in the criminal justice system, particularly in comparison to those that are involved with contact sexual offending. Less stable intimate relationships than the general population. Some studies suggesting problems around intimacy, emotional loneliness, low self-esteem and social skills for some of those individuals. Some evidence that autism is overrepresented amongst this population, but equivocal evidence, partly because when individuals are under investigation or indeed arrested, if they are on the autistic spectrum, then often they are not diagnosed at that point. When compared to contact sexual offenders, individuals involved with online offending are more likely to have sexual feelings towards children, but less likely to have cognitive distortions about sexual agency of children, and also less likely to have a criminal history. Not a lot of evidence really about those involved with online solicitation and grooming. Not enough to really confidently tell us whether they look more like CSAM viewers or more like contact offenders. I'll come back to that in a minute. And certainly suggestions that there are kind of subgroups within these populations as well. What the study didn't bring out, and partly because this question hasn't really been asked in many studies so far, but whether there are issues around mental health and emotional health and well-being issues for those that are involved with online offending. We did some work recently looking at 800 individuals that we had worked with over a 10-year period at Lucy Faithfull Foundation Scotland, what used to be called Stop It Now Scotland until we rebranded last year. And actually what we found was that almost 2/3 of the individuals that we worked with almost all of whom were individuals who had been arrested by the police for online sexual offences, had gone to a GP at some point, or mental health professionals in relation to anxiety, depression, or other kinds of mental health presentations. So I think there's something to recognise here, that that there are kind of factors around kind of mental health issues for many of the individuals that either may predate their offending or may be comorbid with the offending itself. And hopefully this is brought out by, here are some case studies. Now, all of these individuals are real individuals that I've met and worked with. Obviously, I've changed their names, and these are not their real photographs. But Jack, age 64, arrested for having a large collection of child sexual abuse material, some of it which he did access from the darknet. Interestingly, when I met with him, within a minute, he had said to me, one of the things you need to know about me is that I'm a lifelong paedophile. Which I thought is interesting, because we don't often hear people saying that. He described having sexual thoughts and feelings towards young children from early adolescence. He said that he'd had few relationships with adults in his life. He'd been married to a woman for a couple of years, but the relationship didn't work out. He said partly because, in his words, the way he looked at children when they were out, and she kind of realized that what was going on in terms of my fantasies. He was retired, but and this was a real kind of red flag for us. He'd spent a good deal of his life working with children, and indeed, one of the things that followed on from us meeting with him is triggering a kind of a historical investigation into whether there were issues that had come up in his professional career as well. So really, quite a concerning individual at a number of different levels, and compare him to Dave. Dave is 50, health and safety officer, clinical depression for the last 3 years, off work for a good bit of time. That depression definitely coincided with the onset of his offending behaviour, quite socially isolated. He was working away from home as well for a good bit of time, married, currently separated, no children. He described himself as a compulsive collector. He had an enormous amount of legal pornography that he had kept, but also child sexual abuse material. 13 hard drives were taken away by the police for assessment. Interestingly, he said that he had been looking at more and more extreme material over a period of time, and he'd never really given any thoughts sexually to children until he'd found some videos of 13 and 14-year-old girls. And what he said to me was, look, I did what I always do when I look at images online. And I didn't think the images of children were any different to anything else I was looking at. But when I closed my laptop, he said, my heart pounded faster than it ever had done before, because I realized that what I was doing for the first time was breaking the law. And when I opened up the laptop the following day, those were precisely the kind of images that I wanted to look at again. Which is interesting, because this is not somebody who's going online with very clear paedophilic sexual interest, but somebody more that has a capacity to be sexually interested in children in certain contexts. And then there are kind of other drivers in all of this as well. And then compare him to Alex. Alex is 17 years old. On the autistic spectrum, bullied at high school, very confused about sexual and gender identity. He actually was exploited, groomed himself online, shared sexual images of himself, really kind of exploited to kind of share those images of himself. But he said, actually, then these adults sent me images of other teenagers and younger children, and I was quite turned on by those images. And then he found himself within some kind of online communities, particularly on particular kind of messaging apps, which is something that Karen was talking about early on. And he said that actually I found I had quite a lot of kind of power within that community, because I could then find other images for individuals that people were looking for. So not only was he an individual who was viewing these kind of images, but he was actively involved with the procurement and trading of those images at age 17. He also said to me, look, I knew this was wrong, but I didn't know how wrong it was, because when I went onto these groups, I found hundreds of people there. And I thought, if it was so wrong, how could there be so many people looking at this kind of stuff? And was it almost like a technical illegality, like speeding? Was a good way of people good example of people justifying things to themselves, but also I do think there's something there about a kind of artistic kind of frame of reference, which is quite interesting. And then finally, Mark. When I met with Mark, a 33-year-old police officer, been arrested for viewing images, married with a 2-year-old daughter. Images were of 8 to 12-year-old boys, and one of the things he said in us meeting with him, he said, look, I'm not saying that this is any mitigation or excuse, but he said, I was sexually abused by my own uncle between the ages of 8 and 12. And he said, look, I have often wondered whether there was something that was never quite kind of processed or resolved for me in all of this, insofar as I had an erection when I was abused. And I wonder whether, that he said, I have to be absolutely clear. I was looking at these images as an adult and I was masturbating to them. But I wonder whether there's some kind of unresolved connection with what had happened to me in some way. So the important thing to bring out here is that we have 4 different individuals with very different trajectories and pathways into the behavior, and very different needs, I would say, as well. It's difficult to say anything generalizing about kind of pathways into this behavior, because there are multiple pathways and different kinds of entry points. But some of the things that certainly contribute to the enormous figures that Karen was talking about in terms of numbers of images and numbers of individuals looking for this kind of material is that accessibility, anonymity, and availability of this kind of material is really, some of the drivers in all of this. I think online compulsivity, particularly around pornography and indeed sexual behavior generally, is a factor. I tend to try and avoid the language of porn addiction. I don't think it's very helpful for many of the individuals that we work with, but many of them have almost a kind of compulsive use of sex as a coping mechanism online. There are affordances provided by the internet insofar as algorithms, particularly on mainstream pornography websites, will try and pull people into looking into more extreme material over time. People describe then desensitization to that material, and then often describe a capacity to be sexually interested with images that they see. But they will often say, yeah, but I was doing this, but I'm not like the kind of people I see on TV who are being arrested. I'm my own person in all of this. So sometimes that othering that we have about the kind of individuals that are involved with this kind of offending behavior makes it easier for people to reconcile to themselves, well, at least I'm not that kind of person. On the left hand of the screen, you can see a paper that we published a couple of months ago, actually co-authored by the forensic psychologist in my team, looking at some of the pathways into this behavior. This slide, there's a lot on there. I'll just quickly talk you through this, but this was a study that was done by Ethel Quayle and a PhD student that she had working with her. Interviewing 50 guys that we had worked with at Lucy Faithfull Foundation who had been involved with online offending. And almost all of them described that their kind of entry point was kind of viewing legal pornography. Although for some people it was about being involved with a wider range of kind of cyber sex behaviors, including viewing legal pornography. And then they talked about kind of shifting into accessing illegal images, and then over time moving to more intentional and systematic viewing, developing particular kind of search and viewing tactics. And then you can see episode 3 kind of adopting tactics to avoid detection and incrimination and all of that, such as deleting content, using mobile devices. And then you can see the kind of exit from these kind of behaviors as well. What's important here is if you begin to think about these behaviors as a process rather than an event, and we think about them as an event because usually the important thing we're responding to in our services is after somebody's been arrested. But if we think about it as a process where people are incrementally moving towards and through offending behavior, then there are lots of opportunities for prevention in all of this. Let me say a few things about risk profiles. So I'm moving through some stuff quite quickly here, but I'm kind of aware that kind of time is of the essence. The risk management literature review that I mentioned early on pointed out that almost all studies that have looked at reoffending rates of those that are involved with online offending suggested that there are very low reoffending rates, and the vast majority of individuals who do reoffend are involved with further online offending rather than contact offending. So this idea that all online offenders go on to become contact offenders, there's little evidence to substantiate that. But of course, a minority do, those individuals who are kind of higher risk. Of those individuals who are at higher risk of moving through to contact offending, issues around antisociality have been picked out as a particular risk factor, along with some studies suggesting that more extreme kind of material and perhaps a predisposition to a sexual interest in children and lower kind of pro-social factors may be factors in all of this. CPORT, which is the main assessment tool around assessment of online offenders, I think the only kind of assessment tool that we currently have in that particular space, does look at those two different axes, kind of antisociality and sexual interest in children as the kind of key factors in kind of risk prediction. Interestingly, there's some recent evidence, particularly from colleagues in Finland, and the link is in this particular slide to their research. Those that were involved with the Redirect project in Finland, who have been looking at offending in the darknet, who would suggest that actually those involved with darknet offending seem to be a bit more criminologically orientated, which is worth paying attention to. Early days in our understanding about all of this. And then when we're talking about risk, just to point out that we need to clearly think about risk that individuals present to children, and of course risk of reoffending generally. But actually, those who are involved with online offending, particularly at point of arrest, are at elevated risk of suicide. And indeed, a study by Chad Steele, who used to work at FBI, is now an academic, reviewing the literature on this, concluded that individuals involved with online offending are up to 100 times more likely to commit suicide than those in the general population. And actually, the risk factors around suicide, particularly for those who have been arrested, are individuals who are married, have children, are more socially anchored and have higher socioeconomic status. Basically, the more you have to lose, the higher the risk around suicide. Just to say that those that therefore are involved with viewing sexual images online, there's an overlap, of course, with contact child abuse for some individuals. I'll say more about that in a second. But also we know that there's an overlap with those that are involved with online solicitation and online grooming. And indeed, some people are involved with solicitation of children, not to abuse them offline, but to actually abuse them online, to exploit them online and get more images. So we see this kind of complex kind of Venn diagram kind of situation. The relationship between kind of viewing child sexual material and contact sexual offending is really quite complex, partly because although we know only a minority go on to be involved with contact sexual offending, as has been pointed out by Chris, the majority of images actually are produced in domestic settings. So, of course, some individuals were involved with the creation of these first generation images. And also, separate from that, we know that there was a cohort of individuals who have been involved with contact sexual offending in the past, sometimes undetected, sometimes detected, sometimes recently, sometimes quite a bit in the past, particularly around adolescence. And then they move towards viewing CSAM. And you could actually consider what they're doing as being a way of trying to kind of cope or handle their own kind of sexual, or manage their own sexual thoughts and feelings towards children in some way. So we see this kind of complex relationship, because actually we do know that quite a few that are involved with viewing these kind of images may have been involved with contact offending in the past. And then there's where it kind of overlaps with having sexual conversations with children, which is probably a more kind of controversial and kind of difficult area. A few things
Stuart, if I could just come in, sorry to interrupt you, just to say we've probably got about another 5 minutes before we really need to move to questions. So just to give you a chance to think about what content you want to share, but we will send it all out. Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
that's great. I do have a timer running, so yeah, thanks for that, Claire.
Right, thank you.
Risk assessment in a child protection context. If you're involved with these kind of cases, particularly in a child protection role, because it can often take up to 2 years between kind of arrest and conviction of an individual. Just to note that there's a section in the child protection guidance, which you can see on the right side of the screen, that's specifically on that. And this publication on the left came from the Centre for Expertise in Child Sexual Abuse, which is for social workers making decisions in this area. That particular publication makes a kind of a number of arguments, but the main point here is that discovering that your partner has been involved with these kind of behaviours, including accessing these kind of materials, can be incredibly traumatic for parents. It can take a long time for a conviction to take place. So this particular publication then can help you in that pre-conviction space begin to think about what risk means in this kind of situation, and how do we begin to kind of promote overall safety and well-being for children in the family home. So I would certainly kind of recommend that. In terms of kind of prevention, just to kind of point out that if we're thinking about kind of prevention of online child sexual abuse, what we do to make sure that actually this stuff doesn't happen in the first place, then there's stuff around kind of universal prevention, the stuff that we need to get to everyone, which is kind of online safety education in schools for all children. We need to make sure that all parents are equipped to have conversations with their children about digital resilience and online safety, and we need the proper kind of deterrence messaging for everyone. But also there are kind of risky situations. There are children who are kind of higher risk, who need more kind of targeted support, and indeed parents where there are issues around kind of near misses or around exploitation and harm in the family environment need specific supports. Those who are starting to kind of move towards online offending behavior, we need to get the right kind of disruption and messaging, and then we can think about what needs to be there in terms of supports after offending has taken place. But the problem, I think, is that we often in our services just really think about what's there for everyone after harm has been identified, and we need to get better at trying to ensure that we do everything we can to prevent abuse happening in the first place. So just some quick resources before we finish. This particular resource here, you can find this on our website, but you'll get it sent out to you. It's a resource for parents that we developed with parents themselves, really helping parents know that where they can find information about what apps children are using now, how to set up parental controls and devices. But actually, most importantly, it's about the relationship with your child and how you have conversations with them about their online lives and how we thread stuff around online safety into that. So it doesn't just feel like a one-off conversation or surveillance of what our child does online. So have a look at that if you work with parents. We have an online resource called Get Help, which is on the Stop It Now website for adults who are worried about their online sexual behavior. This particular resource is a manualized treatment program that people can use themselves, completely anonymous. It was used last year by 10,000 individuals in Scotland. And a lot of those individuals accessed it by being signposted to it by police deterrence campaigns, which is what we're going to finish with. We also now have a similar online resource for young people who are worried about their own sexual behavior, including online behavior, called Sure, which I would absolutely recommend to you. And then just to finish off, a kind of call to action, really, which just a few things to think about. You've heard what our helpline can provide, Stop It Now helpline. Please do everything you can to make sure that information about it is being passed to professionals and service users who might be able to use it in some way. Have a look at the some of the resources that I've highlighted in this presentation and use them as kind of sources of ideas within your own work. Consider how you signpost service users to resources around prevention. If you're working with families, working with individuals where there are lots of risk factors and low protective factors, but there isn't any evidence of abuse or exploitation taking place, but you're worried about that, then there are resources and organizations we can signpost people to. And finally, we've talked about deterrence campaign work. There will be a social media pack to help any of you kind of promote some of the campaign work that we're going to do, which is a video which you're about to see, which will be launched officially on the 1st of July. So that's a week on Monday. My contact details are here if there's anything you want to kind of reach out to me for, but also happy to kind of take any questions. And I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully we'll get a chance to kind of show the video in question.
All right, see you later.
You might just be having a peek. A little look. A wee glance. But that's how it starts. Viewing sexual images of children under 18 is illegal. Just like sexual conversations with children are illegal. You can't hide. You will get caught, and everyone will find out. Stop it now and get help before more lives are ruined.
So again, thanks so much. And we're just going to move, just so folks are aware, I'm going to move now to the questions and some of the themes that have come through. And Stuart, I just wanted to reflect, I think, again, so helpful for our community that are on this morning who are concerned about child protection, that if we're going to have a holistic view around this and be preventative, then we need to think, what do we know about victims, but what do we know about perpetrators as well? And having that really holistic view across all of that is required. And I thought you did that really well for us. So thank you. Maybe just going back to Chris and then Karen for a moment. I think one of the things that's come through is that issue around the link between young men particularly and their vulnerability and disclosure. And I suppose I just wanted you to maybe speak just a bit more of that. And one of the things I suppose it raised for me that I think others are thinking about as well is there a relationship between the stigma that is involved, particularly for young men, and the way in which they are then more vulnerable to the exploitation? So Chris, I wonder if you and then Karen can maybe talk to that, and then Stuart, if you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you, Claire. I think from the IWF's perspective, that information really comes to us second hand. When we have victims report into us, we actually don't have direct contact with the victims. We are only able to establish that they are being extorted, particularly in the financial realms, because the way in which offenders typically operate is that they will screen capture multiple images of the victim and then overlay the imagery with the threat. And it's only in us identifying those images that we can see that the child is being extorted. We're not in dialogue with them. Like I said, the relationship between us and Childline on a reporting side means that Childline are having those potential conversations with the victims. We are really just responding to the imagery. But speaking to our peers and other organisations, there is an additional vulnerability in terms of boys generally being more gregarious and more susceptible to an approach from a seemingly attractive young female to risk take. And I even attended one webinar where the speaker was talking about going back literally into our DNA of young men needing to I'm talking hunter-gatherer type, that far back in history, where the reward, the dopamine hit to be able to go out there, do things and take risks is kind of inherent and built into some degree into boys. But I think this vulnerability that boys absolutely tend to be more gregarious and more willing to take that risk, literally with a stranger, whereas most young girls, or lots of young girls, if they were approached online by someone that's suggesting within a matter of moments that they share nudes, are not likely to go down that particular path. And I think that's why we're seeing the discrepancy. But we're not having direct contact with those children, so it's difficult to me to kind of give their first-hand anecdotal information.
Yeah, and I appreciate, Chris, that this is also nuanced as well, because you're talking about the increased risk of particularly young women. So I appreciate this is all, there are no hard and fast rules here, it's all very nuanced. Karen, was there anything that you wanted to say there?
I would just probably reiterate what Chris has said around about risk-taking behaviours at a particular age and in a particularly teenage male's development. And yeah, I'm not a kind of wholehearted expert. The likes of Stuart would be able to say more round about that. But it's what we see, and the stigma is massive at that age, disclosing what has happened. But yeah, just reiterate what Chris has said. Sorry.
Thanks, Karen. Stuart, do you want to come in?
I would just add that there was some data that came through from Thorn about a year and a half ago, which looked at a cohort of individuals who had been sexually exploited online. And of course, as you would expect, girls were much more likely to be sexually exploited than boys and all of that. But if you cut up the data in a different way and looked at sexuality, children who were LGBTQ+ were as likely to be exploited as girls within that study. And I don't think it would be untoward to say that probably includes gay and bisexual young men within all that particularly. So I think there are particular risk factors there in terms of how young men are perhaps exploring their sexuality in, let's be very clear, not to be victim blaming in all of this, but often some quite risky areas. If you're 15 years old and you're on Grindr, then actually that's quite a dangerous place to be. And that's one of the stories that we hear from young people, young men who are being involved with stuff around sexploitation.
Thanks very much. We've had a couple of questions, or there's a couple of questions around some of the safeguards that are in legislation and Ofcom, and so the new online safety legislation, the new draft codes for Ofcom, which don't set age limits. So I think, again, people are just getting a sense of how helpful do you think our current kind of legislative framework and codes of practice are, and where do they need to be strengthened? So Karen, that's a big question, but I'm going to come to you.
Just give me the easy question, Claire.
I know, sorry about that.
I think we're at the beginning of this journey in relation to this, and I think the Online Safety Act is a step, but I think we would all agree there's a lot further to go on the journey. And I know in Scotland, we're nationally looking at a strategic group now to look at what needs to get done in this country, which will be reflected in some way, I guess, potentially roundabout legislation as well. But, I don't think any of us actually believe that it's going to stop anything. It's part of a journey towards trying to make the world a better place online for children.
Thanks. Chris or Stuart want to come in there? Chris, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just really going to say what Karen said. I mean, we are, as the Internet Watch Foundation, and have been engaged with Ofcom really since the bill. The bill's now sort of like changed into an act. So we are still in sort of like that consultation phase. We are still putting recommendations forwards where we see gaps, particularly from our side, from the online side. And Ofcom is still building its team. Like I said, we are kind of focusing on trying to have our ducks in a row by the end of the year in terms of moving things forwards. But it's very much going to be an iterative process, as Karen's already kind of sort of like spelt out. But it's not yet perfect. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the fact that finally, because we've been talking about regulation for years, it's quite clear that industry regulating itself is a failed experiment. So we just need to build on that, but need to appreciate perhaps that this is not going to happen overnight.
Thanks, Chris. Stuart, anything else from you?
Well, if there are colleagues from Ofcom on the call, I think they should be answering the question rather than us. But I also, yeah, I mean, the Online Safety Act is a game changer. But I think the danger is that we then just think it's the responsibility of big tech to sort out this problem. And as I was kind of saying in my presentation, we're kind of showing that kind of grid, looking at different prevention targets. Actually, big tech has a role in all of this, but so do parents, so do teachers, so do professionals. We all need to play a part and know what our role is in terms of prevention. So I think that there's a danger that we kind of step back through the Online Safety Act and kind of think, oh, somebody else is sorting that out, rather than actually thinking about the necessity of having ongoing conversations with children in our lives about online safety.
Thanks, Stuart. I think that's so helpful, and it links to one of the other things that's coming through, because you imagine that for the audience here, it's about saying, what can we do individually and collectively? So I think just maybe in two parts, people are asking about what you've taken us through some really helpful resources, but what else is there out there to support parents and carers of very young children? Perhaps again, for this audience, kinship carer or foster carers who may be older as well and not as tech savvy as we're saying, although I know those two things don't necessarily go together. And also, I'm taking these things as three, is there a way of also showing that impact of AI that you showed? So there's three kind of elements to that about how do we support parents and carers of very young children? How do we think about, the whole care community, that we're not just thinking about parent and carers, but other people in other settings like residential, and that piece around AI. So I don't know, Karen, I'll come to you first, then Chris, then Stuart.
I think there's a lot of resource out there. I think just now what we need to do kind of nationally is start to pull things together to help areas, have a look at what good practice is happening across the country. And I know discussions with CPC Scotland earlier this week, that was what was coming out through that meeting as well. But I think that's a kind of starter point, because there is good work happening in some areas, toolkits, training of practitioners, inputs with parents at schools, etc. And I know police are involved in some of them, but not all of them. So I do think there's a bit of work for us nationally to do to just bring all that together so that there is somewhere for people to go to see what they can dip into and take what they need out of it.
Thanks, that's really helpful, Karen. I know that Tam Bailey, who's the chair of CPC, is on the call today, is on the webinar. So that's something that again we can be working with them on. Chris, anything else from you?
Yeah, I mean, I can either do it now or obviously share with you after the event, Claire, but the Internet Watch Foundation is 1/3 of the UK Safer Internet Centre. So certainly happy to kind of provide links to the Safer Internet Centre, excuse me, which specifically I could see in the chat someone asked about content specifically for the younger age spectrum, and their resources cover content for 4 to 11-year-olds. Again, saferinternet.org.uk. Again, they've also got resources as well as all of the resources that I showed earlier for the IWF. So I think there actually is a multitude of resources out there. But just coming to the AI thing, we are already engaged, and we've been running an AI roundtable event, which includes the CPS, the Home Office, various other stakeholders. Because when we first saw AI content being distributed, it came as a bit of a bombshell. So we wanted to get ahead of the curve. So there is a huge amount of work being done in that space, not least engaging with the internet industry and flagging up the risks and the dangers and looking at the controls and things that could be put in place there. But also, and this kind of flows into policing as well, is getting that public messaging out there to make sure that the wider public and indeed offenders, perpetrators understand that AI is not a victimless crime, whether or not you're talking about the images that were scraped in their billions off the internet with nobody's permission of children, to the fact that if you're proficient in AI now, and we see chats from offenders every day, if you're proficient in AI, there are offenders taking commissions from individuals. So basically they will say, you know, for $50, send me a picture of a child that you want to see an abuse image of, tell us the scenario in which you want to see that child abused, and they will then generate the AI for it. So having that consistent message pushed back that generative AI, when it comes to child sexual abuse material, is not an alternative avenue to minimize minimize the effect. There are still children involved, albeit at a step removed.
Thanks for that, Chris. So important to hear that. Thanks. Stuart, anything else from you on that?
And the next phase, which we haven't really seen yet, I don't think, is the use of AI in relation to online solicitation and grooming, which I think is probably inevitable. So we're all on a kind of learning curve in all of this. But going back to your original point, so for very young children, high levels of use of parental controls, supervision and monitoring, and also making sure that your child knows that they can go and speak to an adult about anything that worries them. I know that my 9-year-old daughter, my daughter when she was 9 years old, she's not 9 anymore, but I remember her coming to be quite upset because she had been on the laptop with parental controls on there, looking at pictures from Nintendo because she wanted to draw some pictures of Pokemon characters. But of course, in going on to images, you then have some people involved with cosplay, and some of the images of people doing cosplay weren't pornographic, but they were slightly sexualized in various ways. And she was really quite overwhelmed by that, but fortunately knew that she could go and speak to someone about it. So, making sure that actually that your child can come and speak to you about things is essential. Safer Internet Centre, as Chris has said, is a great source of stuff. As is the Parents Club in Scotland. Loads of videos and loads of resources that Police Scotland have been involved with developing along with ourselves there, and also NSPCC. I think have absolutely fantastic resources online, and that would be my kind of go-to place for online safety for parents.
Thanks very much, Stuart. And we can get some of that information out to people as well if that's helpful. So just to say it's 10 to 12, we've got another couple of questions, so it'll be kind of 12 o'clock before we finish. So just another couple. And Karen, I'm going to come to you first on this because this is quite an important but a technical question, but somebody's asked around, in terms of report and remove, do the images have to be shared online, or is there still a capacity for young people or others to report where they've got a fear that something's happening, so where they think they're anticipating that might go happening? Where can they go with that,
I'm probably going to defer to Chris because he's in charge of all that. So
yeah. So
thanks.
When Report Remove was initially set up, the service allowed victims to report the URLs, the web address where they knew that the content was online. That's still in effect. So if they know that the content has been distributed and it's on a publicly accessible place, if it's on Twitter, should I call it X, or it's on Instagram or wherever it is, if it's publicly accessible, then they could report the URL. So that's a retrospective action. In 2021, we enhanced Report Remove to give it a proactive edge, and that's where, imagine if you're a young person, you've created for want of a better term, a selfie, and you've sent an image to someone, and you then reflect and think, well, this might end up online, even though I've perhaps said to the person, don't share it. If they are still in possession of that image, they can physically send the image to us, which we will then assess and create a digital fingerprint for, assuming it meets the threshold to be considered criminal. And then that digital fingerprint, that hash, is then daily sent out to the internet industry. So it will go to Meta, it will go to Google. They download our hash list on a daily basis. And the idea is that they can then detect either potentially on upload at the point of upload, or detect retrospectively by scanning their service for any time that image may appear. So the URLs is kind of like after the horse is bolted, whereas the ability to send the image is speculative, and it's the child taking a proactive step to say, well, I don't know that it's online, or I don't know that it's actually being distributed, but here is an option I can take forward to reduce or mitigate the potential for that happening in the future.
Thanks, so helpful, Chris, and so clear as well. Thanks so much for that. So this kind of last question for the three is a kind of sweeping question I appreciate to kind of end on, but I think the reason that so many people have turned up today and continue to be interested is because their passion for child protection, but also I think they're concerned that things are changing so quickly in this context, that how do we keep up with that? So I suppose just a question around anything else that you would advise us as a child protection community and as a community concerned with children needing care and protection about how do we think about how we continue to build the confidence and capacity of both workers and carers to manage this increasingly complex context that we're working in. So I know a big sweeping, but just anything else that you feel you've not had a chance to say, or things that you would advise us as the Centre for Excellence or CPC to say this is what you should be providing for staff. So I'll let Stuart, do you want to kick off, and we'll then go to Chris and Karen. Sorry, Chris.
Karen, I know that you said that you often feel overwhelmed by kind of technology nowadays, and I'm sure most of us on the call would feel the same. And I quite often hear from parents and carers saying, well, my kids know much more about all this stuff than I do. And that, unfortunately, will always be the case. That our younger generations will know more about these things than we do. But actually, as a professional working in this area, I don't think we need to worry too much about that, insofar as long as we know the places we can get reliable information when we need it. So you do need to know what all the new apps are, but you do need to know that there's an NSPCC website that you can go and look at, which will tell you every app that's out there at the moment, and will note whether there are any issues around risk, safety, and security in relation to those apps, so that you can always go somewhere to get the info. If you know where you can get good information, then actually what it is about what we need to do in terms of kind of promoting safety in all aspects of our life with children is about conversations. It's about relationship. And that's the stuff as childcare professionals we do really well. So, I think as long as you know where you can get information, don't feel overwhelmed by what sometimes feels like an apocalyptic kind of future about kind of online harm. All the evidence would suggest, as increased offending takes place online, we're also seeing increasing detection of harm, and we're also seeing increasing numbers of individuals who are worried about their own behaviours, seeking out self-help. So there are things being done, and we can signpost people to the right kinds of resources if we know about them.
That's so helpful, Stuart. Thanks so much. Karen?
Yeah, the resource that there's an absolute heap of resources out there particularly through Chris's organisation as well, UK Safer Internet Centre, NSPCC, as Stuart's mentioned, CEOP Safety Centre. The list goes on. There's so much out there, but I think it's important to include children and young people in those conversations about how we take that education forward as well, because I think they're the ones that could probably steer us, being given the generational gap. But my hope is that the kind of new strategic group and the work that will be going on in this area will focus on that kind of practitioner awareness, parent and carer awareness, and just try and help that education aspect and prevention.
Thanks, Karen. Just before we get the final word from Chris, I think you've hit on something really important there as well about how do we get information to people, but how do we talk to children and young people with, that's developmentally appropriate and to their needs. So I think there's something else in there that we may need to think about. So thanks for that. Chris, final words from yourself.
Yes, I mean, I'll just reiterate what Stuart and Karen said. I mean, the latest campaign that the IWF launched this week, actually, which is about young people sharing their nudes. Again, it's about making sure from a child perspective that we're using language that resonates with them, that they understand. It's about professionals being live to what the risks are, being aware of the risks, and as Stuart said, knowing where to go to get resource advice and guidance, and just be curious. The chart that I showed and the reality of that I see and that my team see on a daily basis, where we have children estimated to be aged 3 to 6, seemingly alone in a house with an internet enabled device. A lot of what we see is preventable. It's clearly a different conversation and a different risk. That 3 to 6 year old children should not be alone with an internet enabled device, and when it's happening, it's either because the parents don't know the risk, but it's wholly preventable. When we're dealing with late age teens, that's a very different risk. They are making more of an informed choice about the risks that they're taking. So you can advise and you can give information, you can give resources, but at least 50% of the problem, from my perspective, shouldn't be happening, because children having access to those devices unsupervised is something that we, as the adults in that space, need to be doing more to make sure that our children aren't being compromised in that way.
Thanks so much, Chris. So with an eye to time, I'm just going to do some final comments and thanks. So first thanks, of course, goes to Chris and Karen and Stuart for coming today and sharing your expertise with us. And we all know you're busy, but also the work that goes into putting these presentations together. And I'm absolutely confident about how impactful that has been and informative been for people. So thank you so much. And I hope that this is, we keep this connection going with CELSIS and with the child protection community in Scotland. Thanks to everybody who's turned up today on a Friday morning in huge numbers. It says such a lot about your interest and passion for the area, and I hope that's been impactful. Let us know about anything else you would like us to follow up on, either information or other things that you think that CELSIS, and I'm sure Tam would be okay with me saying, or anything else that you feel that CPC should be doing as well. Thanks to the CELSIS team. It's never, these things look like they all flow together, but there's a lot of work that goes into it, so thanks to them. My final comment is just to reiterate some of the wellbeing messages as well. Been a lot of really challenging content this morning, so I would just say to people, go back to our messages that we've given you around if you need to talk to somebody or if you'd like to follow up with us, so please look after yourself. And on that note, just to say thanks very much again to everybody, and I hope you all have a lovely weekend. Thank you.